every military force on the ground was looking for Saddam Hussein.
We pulled down the statue of Saddam. But in order to have a decisive military victory, we needed the real Saddam.
Coalition governments have identified a list of key regime leaders, 55 individuals who may be pursued, killed, or captured.
The special operations forces could go into the most dangerous target and do it at zero to minimal casualty because of their skills. Their focus was really HVTs, high-value targets.
We would get information that was bad information. They would identify a location, there would be nothing there, the wrong individual. The individual was someone that someone else disliked for whatever reason. For the amount of detainees we were pulling off target, we needed someone that could conduct the interrogations to ensure we were getting the information we wanted.
The war's going on for 3 months, and I get orders that I'm gonna go join this task force I'd never heard of.
To do?
I didn't know, but I packed my bags, and they flew me to Crete. And I am picked up by these soldiers with beards. Soldiers don't have beards.
We didn't know Eric, hadn't worked with him previously, and initially it was a bumpy road.
As the interrogator, I work for a commander. I bring in the information that helps him make better decisions. I was learning how to get inside the minds of these prisoners and break them down. When I'm talking about breaking a prisoner, it has nothing to do with physical contact of any kind. It has to do with breaking their previous decision of not cooperating with me to provide me information, and now they choose to provide me that information. That's a break.
It became a big piece of our day-to-day life of using those interrogations. Every individual you talk to can give you something that you didn't know. That was a trick Eric figured out, that if you can store it, it can become value later.
You never know till much later what details really matter. My entire tour into Crete was gonna come down to my last 2.5 hours. Time was running out, but I would not stop looking for Saddam. In 2003, the United States went to war in Iraq. And at that time, I was a staff sergeant in the United States Army. And I was a trained interrogator, but I'd never actually conducted a live interrogation before. See, along with being a trained interrogator, the United States military had also taught me Chinese Mandarin. And for years, the Army had decided that I was much more valuable as a Chinese Mandarin linguist than I would ever be as an interrogator. So in 2003, as the United States is invading Iraq, I'm stationed in Los Angeles, California. And I'm responsible for conducting interviews of any Chinese citizens that we captured trying to illegally enter the United States along our ports. And I was told that my work with the Chinese was so valuable that I would never, ever be sent to Iraq. So you can imagine the shock I felt when 3 months into the war, I showed up to my office in Los Angeles like any other day, and my commander hands me orders for Baghdad. And I asked him, I said, are they sending us linguists to war? At our office in LA, there were 10 of us, and we each spoke a different language. My commander said, Eric, the orders are just for you. I said, to what unit? To what group am I supposed to be going to war with? And he said, Eric, the orders are top secret. They do not say. So in 2003, I'm a staff sergeant in the United States Army. We sergeants, we look after the privates. They're the new guys. And we always tell the privates, say, listen, if y'all don't know something, just ask. We even have a saying, we tell them, there are no stupid questions in the Army. And I remember that morning holding those orders for Baghdad, thinking to myself, I'm fixing to ask my boss a really stupid question. I said, sir, do they speak Chinese in Iraq? He said, no. I said, what am I supposed to do? He said, Eric, I don't know. But I accepted the orders. 10 days later, they put me on a military aircraft for the Baghdad International Airport. And when I get there, I am picked up by this team of soldiers. But they're all wearing civilian clothes, and they have full beards. And they didn't say anything to me, and they took me in this room and set me down at this table. And across the table, one of the bearded soldiers looks at me and he said, are you familiar with JSOC? I said, Jay, what? Is that a word? He said, JSOC. It's the Joint Special Operations Command. I said, man, that sounds really cool. I don't know what that is. He said, Joint Special Operations Command. That's the United States military task force responsible for tracking down the most wanted people in the world. He said, ever since we invaded Iraq, the most wanted man in the world is Saddam Hussein. He's the ace of spades. I don't know if y'all remember in 2003 when the United States invaded Iraq, the Department of Defense, they created that deck of playing cards. And it was Saddam. He was the ace and all of his senior regime members. And one of the bearded soldiers said, Joint Special Operations Command, our exclusive mission in this war is to track down and kill or capture every single person on the deck of cards, mainly Saddam. And I'm sitting there, obviously in shock. And I just said, that's awesome. I said, I cannot think of a better group of guys to have that mission than you all, with your beards and everything. I said, what do you want with me? I'm a Chinese Mandarin linguist. One of the bearded soldiers said, you're a trained interrogator. I said, y'all know I've never done an interrogation in my entire life. What am I doing here? And one of the bearded soldiers said, you're former infantry. You're Ranger qualified. And they were right. When I enlisted back in the Army back in 1994, I enlisted as a grunt. I was an infantryman. I spent 3 years as a paratrooper with the 82nd Airborne Division. And while I was there, I went and I graduated the Army's Ranger School. And it was years later, they taught me Chinese Mandarin and trained me as an interrogator. And one of the bearded soldiers, he said, Eric, we are the interrogators for the Joint Special Operations Command. He said, we have Delta Force teams all through Baghdad. Every single night, they're doing 4 or 5 raids a night looking for Saddam. He said, they're flooding us with prisoners. He said, but we have Delta Force teams out there, out in the Badlands. He said, and those Delta teams, they keep calling us interrogators up, and they want us to go out there with them on their raids. He said, Eric, we're interrogators. We're not infantry. So we called the Army. We said, listen, give us a list of every single military interrogator who's former infantry and a graduate of Ranger School. He said, man, you're the only one on the list. He said, welcome to Baghdad. I was there 3 days. The senior interrogator came to me and he said, Eric, the Delta Force team in Tikrit just called. They're going on a raid tonight, and they've asked for an interrogator to go with them on the raid. You know, we're sending you. I said, all right, obviously I'll go. I said, I feel obligated to tell you, I cannot think of anyone less qualified to go on that raid tonight than me. I said, I'm a Chinese Mandarin linguist. I just got here. And the senior interrogator, he said, Eric, relax. He said, listen, this Delta Force team's in Tikrit. It's Saddam Hussein out Tikrit. It's Saddam's little bitty hometown right in the middle of the Sunni Triangle. There's 20,000 people in this little bitty town. He goes, but when we invaded Iraq, we thought Tikrit was so valuable, we dropped 15,000 US soldiers in Tikrit. He said, Eric, we've gone through every single house. We have not found anybody on the deck of cards in this little town of Tikrit in weeks. He said, we still got that Delta Force team up there. He goes, man, they want an interrogator on tonight's raid. He said, you'll be home tomorrow. So I packed a single change of clothes. I grabbed my weapon, and in the middle of the night, they flew me up to this little bitty town. I'm picked up by this team of Delta Force operators. And they took me to their cool little Delta Force house inside the U.S. compound there in Tikrit, and they tell me, they said, we're going on a raid. They gave me the name of the individual, and they said, when we get there, find this guy. And within an hour, we leave the wire. We're leaving the wire of this U.S. compound. We're driving through this little bitty town in the middle of this war zone. These guys drive up their trucks alongside this house. They jumped out, and they raided it. They blew down the front door, and they went in, Delta style. 5 seconds later, it was straight silence. And the commander comes out, and he looks at me, and he goes, go find our guy. So I go in there, and I start looking for this person. It's clear to me, the person they're looking for is not at this house. But we didn't do one raid. We jumped back in the trucks, and these guys did a second raid, and they did a third. We were out doing raids all night long. And as the sun comes up, that's when you got to go back inside the wire. And as we're coming back inside the wire, I'm thinking to myself, thank God I'm alive. And that will be the craziest night of my life. That's the night I did raids with Delta Force. And now they can send me back to Baghdad, and I can join the rest of the interrogators. And the next morning, the Delta Force commander, he came to me, and he said, Eric, he said, I've been asking for an interrogator here in Tikrit for weeks. He said, now that they sent me one, he said, I can't let you go. He said, you're staying with us. I said, all right, what do you need me to do? He said, we've never fought a war like this before. He said, we have no idea who the enemy are. He said, the CIA has case officers, and they run these informants. And these informants give them leads, and they go hit these houses, they raid, and they capture prisoners. He said, Eric, we have no idea who the prisoners are. He said, the United States Army has a prison here in Tikrit. It's got hundreds of detainees. He said, we literally have no idea who they are. He said, your job, go down there and get these guys to confess. Next day, I brought a couple of prisoners. The Delta Force team gave me a room. They gave me my own linguist. And I began my first interrogations. And I brought that first prisoner in. I'd never done interrogations, but I'd been trained by the United States military. And the United States military, their psychological approach is very clear. You've got to get a confession, and you do that by pretending you have this overwhelming amount of information on these prisoners. And the idea is that the prisoner's gonna go, Uncle, you got me, here's everything I know. And I sat this prisoner down, and I began that interrogation. And it was very clear to me right from the beginning, this guy doesn't trust me at all. He's not answering any of my questions. And after an hour, it was even more clear, he is not going to confess. After 2 hours, prisoner completely stopped talking to me. And I put him aside, and I brought the next prisoner out, and I thought to myself, I'm like, you can't let these guys down. You got to get this guy to confess. And I started with the second prisoner. And I went again, 2 hours with him. And after 2 hours, no trust. Didn't listen to me. Shut down. That first week I was with this Delta Force team, I was spending 12, 14 hours a day. I went through 20 prisoners. I could not get a single prisoner to open up. And I finally told myself, I said, there's no way this is what the Army wants me to do. I said, I don't know how I'm going to get these guys to open up, but I got to stop worrying about these confessions. I said, I got to just talk to them. I've got to figure out who they are. I don't even know what it means to be Iraqi and live under the wrath of Saddam. And the next day I set this prisoner down, and I told myself, see how long you can just keep him talking. Just keep him talking. And I started asking him questions about his family. He'd answer my questions. His job, he'd answer. His life, what it was like with Sunnis and Shia. And I realized as I'm talking to this prisoner, I could keep him talking, but sometimes he was more open and transparent. And other times he was more closed down. I was trying to figure out what it is. And I started to realize it was me. It was the way that I was talking to him. And I started to realize when I'm talking to this man, if I can put my world, everything I believe of them as being an enemy and them being a killer of my comrades, and put that behind me and just talk to him, the more that he'd be open up to me. And the next day I brought in another prisoner. I did it again. I would spend hours and hours with these prisoners, and I started to realize if I can put every single thing in my world behind me and put myself into the shoes of the prisoners, I can get them to open up. And most importantly, I could tell when they were lying to me. I could sit and talk to a guy for 3 or 4 hours and tell you the 7, 8, 9 times exactly where they were lying to me. And I never told the prisoner. And I thought maybe somehow catching these lies is good interrogations. And I'm sitting there, I'm talking to this prisoner. We've been going on 2 days. And the second day, the prisoner, he looks at me and he said, "Mr. Interrogator," he said, "we're buddies, man." He said, "I've been completely honest with you." He said, "When are you going to let me go?" I knew he'd been lying to me. I said, "You haven't lied to me?" He said, "Mr. Interrogator," he said, "if I've told you a single lie," he said, "you can kill me." I said, "Well, I can't kill you, but I'll make a deal with you." I said, "If you have not lied to me, not once," I said, "I'm going to let you walk out that door." I said, "You can go home right now." I said, "But if you've told me one single lie, you spend the rest of your life in this prison." The prisoner kind of sizes me up and he said, "I haven't lied to you." I said, "Not one." And he said, "Deal." I said, "How many brothers do you have?" The prisoner looks at me and he goes, "I told you, I have 3. And I said, "You have 4. And the look on my prisoner's face, his jaw just drops. And the blood completely rushes out of his head and he starts to shake. And I looked at him and I said, "What was our deal?" I said, "What was the deal we just cut?" And the prisoner looks at me and he's shaking and he said, "Can we cut a new deal?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "If you want to spend the rest of your life in this prison," I said, "you can't tell me you don't know who anybody out there against us is. You can't tell me you spent every single day of your life in this little bitty town and you don't know a single person against us." And the prisoner looks at me and he goes, "You don't understand." He goes, "In my neighborhood," he said, "I don't know who they all are." He goes, "But they recruit. There's a team of recruiters. It's these 3 guys." He goes, "They recruited that brother." He said, "The one I still don't know how you know about, my 4th brother." He said, they forced him in. He goes, "They forced these young men in." And I told him, I said, "You take me to those 3 recruiters and I will never go after your brother." I said, "But I got to take their boss. I got to take them out." And he gave them the name and the exact location of these 3 individuals. And I went to my Delta Force commander. His name is Bam Bam. And I went to Bam Bam and I said, "I did it. I think I got you intel from a prisoner." And he said, "Did he confess?" I said, "No." I said, "None of these guys are ever going to confess." I said, "But if you go to these houses, we can actually find some actual insurgent members that we're looking for." And Bam Bam, he looks at me and he said, "Eric, that's not what we do." He goes, "You want me to put a Delta Force team out there on the word of the enemy?" I said, "Bam Bam, I'm telling you, they'll be there." He said, "All right, I'm going to try this one time." And that night, they went and they raided all 3 of the locations that the prisoner gave me. And we actually captured, for the first time since I'd been in Creek, we actually captured somebody we were looking for. And I brought him in and I started my interrogations and I told myself, "You know they've killed Americans. You know they've attacked you. Just listen to them." And I did. I spent all night with them. And I would connect with them. And not once did they ever confess, but they would start to explain to me their story. And I could build this trust in this really short amount of time if I just put myself in their shoes. And each day I would go to Bam Bam and I would say, "Listen, I got us one more piece. One more piece." And we started to build a link diagram, right? We started to put the names of all the bad guys that we were learning about in this insurgency in the Sunni Triangle. And we thought it was amazing because we got up to 500 names. And then we got to 1,000. And after 300 interrogations in 5 months, we had a link diagram of 2,000 names. And as I started to understand these prisoners and these people, we started to learn that this insurgency, these thousands of names, they were all linked together. They were all tied, and they had regional commanders, sub-commanders, district commanders. And at the very, very top was one guy. This one man was running this entire insurgency in the Sunni Triangle. And that one guy was a former inner circle bodyguard of Saddam Hussein. So Saddam, brutal dictator, paranoid, brutal dictator. Everybody hated Saddam. Saddam knew everyone was trying to kill him. He had hundreds and hundreds of bodyguards, all of his bodyguards from this little bitty town of Tikrit. And after these hundreds of interrogations, I knew who all of his bodyguards were, but most of Saddam's bodyguards, when the war began, they just left the country. They were sitting at home doing nothing, except for this one guy, this Mohammed Ibrahim. And he was running the whole show. And I finally went to Bam Bam and I said, if we get this one guy, we can cut the head off the snake. And he said, go get him. And I told him, I said, Bam Bam, I trust these prisoners and they trust me. I said, I need to use them. I need to use them as spies. I've got to start letting my prisoners go out there and come back and report to us. And he looks at me and he said, that's just not what we do. He said, it's enough. We're going on raids from your prisoners' information. He goes, you want to let these guys out, back out there, and then come tell us where to send our Delta Force team? He goes, that's a good way to get everybody killed. And I said, Bam Bam, I need spies. And he said, all right, I'm gonna give you 3 spies. And I picked these 3 prisoners that I knew I could trust, and I brought them in one at a time, and I said, listen, you gotta go help me find this bodyguard, this Mohammed Ibrahim. I said, go track him down. And as I'm sending him out, literally the CIA, the head of the CIA guy in Tikrit, Iraq, he comes in and he says, we're out of here. He goes, there is no way we're gonna run our spies the same time you guys are running prisoners. And Bam Bam let the CIA pick up and leave. And he looked at me and he said, it's just us, man. He goes, it's just this team and you. And I think he said, you, the Chinese Mandarin linguist that has never done this before. And I said, Bam Bam, we can trust these prisoners. And I just prayed they would come back and meet me again, and they did. I'd send them out and they would come in and they would report, and they told me, they said, listen, your bodyguard has a driver. And they said, this driver knows everything. And I said, great, take me to the driver. And one of my spies looks at me and he said, your driver, the driver of your bodyguard, he's connected, he's related to the governor of Tikrit. I said, what? How's that possible? So to kind of give you a little background of this war that we're fighting here, Saddam Hussein, he's Sunni. We kicked Saddam out of power. All Sunnis hate us. Tikrit is the heart of the Sunni triangle. This heart of the Sunni triangle, they had to have a governor, the person in charge of them. So we Americans, we found this poor Sunni guy, and we paid him like millions of dollars to take the job to be governor, and everybody wanted to kill the governor of Tikrit. And the governor of Tikrit had his own hundreds and hundreds of bodyguards. The only way this puppet governor of ours stayed alive is he had this huge security force. And my spy comes in and he says, the man you're looking for, Mohammed Ibrahim, he has a driver. And that driver lives right next to the governor's mansion because he's related to the governor. So what does that mean? He looks at me and he said, the governor's head of security is the cousin of Mohammed Ibrahim's driver. And I went to Bam Bam and I said, hey, Mohammed Ibrahim, the guy that's running this whole thing, he has a driver, and the prisoner can take us to the driver's house and we can go get him right now. And Bam Bam said, good job, man. We did it. Let's go get him. I said, just one little thing, kind of a fun fact. Mohammed Ibrahim, who's running this insurgency, his driver's cousin happens to be the head of security for that puppet governor of ours. And Bam Bam said, we can't touch him. He said, Eric, that puppet governor is the United States military's best friend. And the only way he's alive is that head of security. And if you're telling me that head of security for our puppet governor's cousin is Mohammed Ibrahim's driver, we ain't touching Mohammed Ibrahim's driver. And I said, Bam Bam, I gotta have the driver. And he looks at me and he said, if we go get that driver, we're gonna get shut down quick. And I said, I gotta have the driver. He said, all right, I'm gonna go get him. He said, this needs to go down fast. And that night, Bam Bam and the team captured the driver of the head of the insurgency, Muhammad Ibrahim. And I brought the driver in and I started my interrogation. And it took me 6 hours, but after 6 hours, we connected. We connected. And he broke. And he looks at me and he said, I'm the driver of Muhammad Ibrahim. He said, I deliver orders for every single attack in the Sunni Triangle since this war began. He said, I give the orders for the attacks and I deliver the money. He said, I deliver millions and millions of dollars out of the back of my trunk every single week. And I said, you gotta take me to Muhammad Ibrahim. He said, no. He said, you gotta get the president. And that's what they called Saddam. I said, what do you mean? He said, you have to get Saddam. I said, where is he? He said, I don't know. He said, the only person that actually knows where Saddam Hussein is, he said, is my boss, Muhammad Ibrahim. He said, I take all orders from Muhammad Ibrahim. He's taking all orders from Saddam. And I looked at the driver and I said, you don't have to take me to Saddam. You take me to your boss, Muhammad Ibrahim, and I'm getting you out of here. You'll never, ever spend another second in this prison. And the driver looks at me and he said, every single night, I drop my boss, Muhammad Ibrahim, the head of this insurgency, he goes, I drop him off of one of 5 safe houses around Tikrit. He said, he will be at one of these 5 houses tonight. And we got all 5 of the locations. And I went to Bam Bam and I said, driver just broke. I said, he's taking us to Muhammad Ibrahim. We got 5 locations. And Bam Bam looks at me and he said, we just got shut down. He said, we should not have arrested the cousin of the head of security of the governor of Tikrit. He said, man, your tour's up. He goes, they don't know what the heck we're doing. He goes, they've never heard of anybody on our link diagram. We use our prisoners, and you even let some prisoners go. He goes, they just want us to stop doing what we're doing. You're getting sent home a week early. And I said, what does that mean? He goes, your flight leaves Tikrit in 3 days. And I said, what are you gonna do? He said, well, we got 3 days. He goes, I'm hitting all 5 houses tonight. And that night, Bam Bam and the team raided all 5 of those safe houses. And my bodyguard, Muhammad Ibrahim, was not at any of them. And he brought me back all the prisoners. He brought back 40 prisoners from all 5 of these locations. Bam Bam told me, he said, Eric, we got 2 days. And what used to take me hours, I could do it in minutes. And these prisoners, they open up and they said, yep, I was running a safe house for Muhammad Ibrahim. He was staying here. Another prisoner said, listen, you guys have scared him out of town. And another prisoner said, listen, you pushed him to this town called Samara. And he said, in Samar, Muhammad Ibrahim, his sub-commander in Samar is this man, and he lives in this house. And they gave me the location. And I went to Bam Bam and I said, listen, we pushed him. We scared him. I said, those were 5 good hits. I said, he will be at this house. We got to do 1 more hit. And Bam Bam said, all right, last hit. He's got to be there. And the next day, we went and we raided the sub-commander's house in Samara. And Muhammad Ibrahim wasn't there. But the sub-commander's little brother, younger brother, was there. And I brought the boy in. He's about 24 years old, and he breaks. He broke in 20 minutes. And he looks at me and he said, listen, Muhammad Ibrahim, he never stayed at my house, my brother's house. He said, my brother's his sub-commander. He said, Muhammad Ibrahim just rented a house 2 blocks from where you captured me. And he gave me the location. I went to Bam Bam and I said, man, 1 more raid. We got 1 more raid. He said, all right, man, we got 1 more day, last raid. And we turned and we went and we raided the house of my bodyguard. And he was not there. He wasn't there. His 20-year-old son was there. Muhammad Ibrahim's 20-year-old son was there. And Bam Bam said, all right, Eric, your flight leaves tonight. But I had all day. And I brought in the 20-year-old and I started to talk to him. And he looks at me and he said, my dad, Muhammad Ibrahim, he said, he was here 2 hours ago. He said, how would I know where he went? And I'm looking at all my prisoners that we had stopped taking down to the prison. They were literally living in this house with us. I mean, they were locked up and they had their own room, but they were living with us. I'm looking at them all going, how would any of them know where my bodyguard is now? And I sat back down with that boy and I told myself, if you'll just listen to him, he'll give you something. And I started to talk to Muhammad Ibrahim's son, and we connected. And then we were like, really connected? Because apparently Muhammad Ibrahim's son and Muhammad Ibrahim's relationship was not going so well. And the boy's crying and telling me, he's like, yeah, my dad doesn't really care for me anymore. My dad doesn't respect me. And I'm like, oh man. And he said, I just wish we did things like when I was little. And I asked the boy, I said, well, all right, what do y'all used to do? And he said, well, he never takes me fishing anymore. He said, they always go fishing and they don't take me fishing anymore. And I said, where do they go fishing? He said, along the Tigris River. And I said, where? And he said, they just built a pond along the Tigris River. He said, they fish next to the pond. And when the boy told me they just built a pond, one of the very early interrogations that we did when I got to Tikrit, we captured Saddam Hussein's cook. It was his chef. And it was the chef, and the chef was he was a cook. He was wide open. He didn't care. He said, yeah, man, I cooked every single meal for Saddam Hussein for 8 straight years. He said, it's pretty much the easiest job in the world. He said, Saddam, he really just likes this fish dish. It's called mazgoof. And the chef said, I make the best mazgoof in the world. I'm Saddam Hussein's cook. And when the boy told me that his dad and his buddies built a fish pond, why would you build a fish pond? During the middle of a war, unless you needed to stock the pond, because you couldn't go to the market and get fish to cook for your brutal dictator boss, because the United States had occupied your country. And I went to Bam Bam, and I explained the whole story, and I was like, man, we got to do one more raid. And Bam Bam said, on the last night, you want to raid a fish pond? And I said, Bam Bam, I promise the bodyguard will be there. He said, all right, this is our last raid. And that night, Bam Bam and the team raided a fish pond along the Tigris River outside of Samara. And Bam Bam calls and he goes, they built a hut. He said, we're going in. And they went inside and he said, we got 2 guys. And 20 minutes later, he calls on the radio and he said, it's nothing. He said, Eric, it's just 2 fishermen. He goes, get all the prisoners, go to the helicopter, your flight, you're going back to Baghdad, your tour's up. He brought me the fishermen and I brought all these prisoners. And he said, take all the prisoners with you. He said, don't stop. He goes, just get us one more target while you're up there. And I went up to Baghdad and I hadn't seen all these interrogators, all the bearded soldiers. I hadn't seen them in 5 months. As I get there, they get all my prisoners and they say, okay, we're sending all your prisoners to Abu Ghraib. And I said, what do you mean? He said, these are useless. There's nobody on the deck of cards here. They're going to Abu Ghraib tomorrow. But I had one night. And that night, I brought in the first fisherman and I interrogated him. And we connected. And I brought in the second fisherman, and the second fisherman was lying to me, and I went 12 hours, and I turned these 2 fishermen against each other, and after 12 hours, one of the fishermen looks at me and he said, I'm Muhammad Ibrahim. I work for Muhammad Ibrahim. He said, I catch fish out of the river, I put it in the pond. He said, every few days, Muhammad Ibrahim comes and gets fish out of the pond. And I told the fisherman, I said, where did he go? And the fisherman looks at me and he said, listen, Muhammad Ibrahim, he has a deputy, it's the number 2 guy, and he gave me his name, and it was, on my huge link diagram, is the number 2 guy on the whole thing. And the fisherman said, that deputy's my cousin. He said, a couple of days ago, they came to the fish pond and they got the address of our mutual aunt and uncle in Baghdad. He said, I think they went to that house in Baghdad. And I got the exact sketch and the location, and I called the Bam Bam of Baghdad. And I said, man, I need you to hit this raid. And he's listening to me and he goes, does this have anything to do with those fishermen? I said, sir, it's a good hit. He goes, Eric, we do 5-6 raids a night. I'll put it on the list. And that is all I heard. And I'm told I'm leaving the country. I am going out of the country in 3 days. And I waited, hoping they would go on my raid. And my days came and they went. And my flight's to leave at 8 o'clock in the morning on December 13th, 2003. And at 1 o'clock in the morning, on my last day, the Bam Bam of Baghdad calls and he said, we had a slow night. He said, we went on your raid. He said, we didn't find anything. He goes, Muhammad Ibrahim wasn't there. He said, we can bring the prisoners from the house if you want. And I said, yeah, I'll bring them in. And they pointed to the guy that owns the house, and I brought in the homeowner. I sat him down, and I started to interrogate him. And it took me an hour. It took me till almost 4 in the morning. And I realized, this guy's not from Baghdad. This guy's from Tikrit. And it took me another hour, and it finally dawned on me. And I said, wait, this is the deputy. This is the deputy of my bodyguard, Muhammad Ibrahim. And it took me another 30 minutes, and finally he admitted it. He looks and he says, yep, I'm the deputy of Muhammad Ibrahim. And I looked at him and I said, that's awesome. I said, I need you to take me to him. I said, and if you can do it in the next 20 minutes, that'd be great. And the deputy looks at me and he said, mister, he's here. Muhammad Ibrahim has to be here. I said, what do you mean? He said, he was sleeping right next to me when your soldiers captured me in that house. And I thought, did they get my bodyguard? They get my bodyguard last night and they didn't know it? And I went to the guards and I said, bring me every single prisoner from every raid you all did last night. And they brought in, there was only 3 prisoners. And they were sitting on the ground with handcuffs behind their back and hoods over their head. And I thought, is one of these prisoners my bodyguard? I'd never seen Muhammad Ibrahim. I'd never even seen a picture of him. But I knew exactly what he was supposed to look like. My bodyguard was supposed to have a chin. You guys know the actor John Travolta? He's supposed to have a John Travolta chin. And I went to the first prisoner and I started to lift up the hood, and clearly that was not him. And I lifted up the second hood, and that really wasn't him. And I start to lift up the hood of the last prisoner. And before I got the hood off, I saw that chin. And I said, you're Muhammad Ibrahim. Man, I have been waiting to meet you. And the bodyguard looks at me and in perfect English, he said, you're the interrogator from Tikrit. He said, I've been waiting to meet you too. It was 6 o'clock in the morning. My flight left at 8. I had 2 hours. I brought Muhammad Ibrahim into the cell, into the interrogation room. I took off his hood and I told myself, just listen to him. He's going to tell you exactly how to break him. Just listen to him. And I looked at him and I said, there's only one thing we can talk about, and that's the exact location of Saddam. I didn't know what he was going to say, but whatever he said first would tell me exactly what to do. And he looks at me and in perfect English, the big smile on his face, he goes, man, you give me way too much credit. He said, I don't know where that guy is. And I knew exactly how to break him. Muhammad Ibrahim was a bodyguard. Saddam had hundreds of bodyguards, but all those other hundreds and hundreds of bodyguards, why were they allowed to leave? Why did he pick Muhammad Ibrahim? Muhammad Ibrahim was the nicest, fun-loving, whiskey-drinking domino player. Every other one of Saddam's bodyguards, they're like mafia thugs. They used the power that they got from working for Saddam against the local public to their advantage. Everybody in the town terrified of the bodyguards, except Muhammad Ibrahim. Why did Saddam pick him? And I looked at him and I said, I didn't give you any credit. I said, I didn't know who you were before I came to this country. I said, but the 300 prisoners I've interrogated and the 40 of your family members that I have in this prison right now, they give you credit. They give you credit for forcing them to get involved to serve him. they give you credit for ruining their lives. And he looks at me and he just kind of rolls his eyes. But he wasn't rolling his eyes at me. He was rolling his eyes at Saddam. I knew he blamed Saddam. And I looked at him and I said, your wife just had a baby. I knew Muhammad Ibrahim's wife had a baby. It was 3 months old. I knew exactly where that baby was living. And I never, ever, ever sent the troops to that house. And I looked at him, I said, your wife's baby's living right here. I said, we never went there. I said, where else would you go to find someone than their spouse? I said, but I would never put those soldiers at that house, never put that baby's life in danger. I said, what will he do for you now? And he's looking at me at this point, he's kind of whelped up and his eyes are all full of tears and they're running down his face. And he looks at me and he said, I don't know if I should do it. He didn't say he couldn't do it. He said, I don't know if I should do it. And I said, I think you should. I really do. And he looks at me and he said, I can't. And I told him, I said, no, you have to. I said, you're the only one that can finish this. I need it. And he said, I can't yet. I gotta think. I need time. And I told him, I said, I don't have time. I need it now. I said, they are literally gonna come take me out of here. And I mean, on clockwork, the interrogators kind of knock on the door and they're like, what are you still doing here? Your flight's leaving. And I said, listen, this is not a joke. This is not a ruse. I'm not tricking you. I am leaving. I'm the interrogator from Tikrit. I know he's there. You know he's there. Nobody else thinks Saddam's there. I need it now. And he said, I can't. I said, man, I know how this story ends. I'm literally out of time. I said, I'm taking you to this cell. I said, you're gonna die in there. No one's ever gonna talk to you. They don't think you know anything. They don't think he's in Tikrit. You're gonna rot, a terrorist, and an old man, and no one's gonna give you another shot except for now. He said, I can't. And I took him to his cell and I said, listen, when you change your mind and you're gonna take us to Saddam, I said, go crazy, go nuts, make them come talk to you because no one's gonna voluntarily talk to you again. And I put him in his cell and I left. And I went and I grabbed my bags and a few minutes later they picked me up and I'm going to the tarmac. I'm leaving the country. And as I'm going, one of the bearded soldiers in the truck were driving along and he looks at me and he said, you got the #1 guy on this Tikrit link diagram on the last day. And I thought, who cares? I'm gonna get to spend the rest of my life wondering if he was actually ever in Tikrit. As we keep going, the senior interrogator looks at me and he said, what'd you do to your prisoner? I said, I didn't do anything to him. And he finally looks at me and he said, what did you say to your prisoner? I said, I didn't say anything to him. He said, well, our guards are freaking out. He said, they think your prisoner is trying to kill himself. They said he will not stop banging his head against the wall of his cell. And I knew he broke. And I jumped out of the truck. I ran back to the prison. I grabbed Muhammad Ibrahim. I set him down. I lifted off his hood and I looked at him and I said, where is he? And the bodyguard looks at me and he said, we gotta go. We gotta go right now. I said, don't mess with me, man. Where are we going? He said, we're going back to Tikrit. He said, Saddam Hussein's in this little village called Adwar. He's at the farmhouse of a man named Qaisnamek Jassim. And I got the map and he pinpoints it. He goes, this is Case Farmhouse. He's there right now. We gotta go. And by this time the interrogators are back. And I went outside and I said, my guy just broke. And the senior interrogator, he said, man, go get on the truck. I said, you understand? My guy's going to take us to Saddam. And the senior interrogator said, not to Tikrit. Eric, Saddam Hussein's not there. And I gave him the sketch and the map and I said, please call Bam Bam. Tell him Muhammad Ibrahim's dying to take him to Saddam. And I gave him the information and I left. They took me to flight and I left. And when you're with this task force, you don't just go home. You got to go to Doha, Qatar, where the Joint Special Operation headquarters are, and you got to give a huge debriefing of your link diagram. So the next morning, I show up in Doha for my debriefing, and a senior officer opens the door, and he looks out, and he said, all briefings are canceled. Clunk. And I stood there a while, and I knocked on the door again. I said, I don't think I can leave the country until I give this briefing. I said, I'm the interrogator from Tikrit. And he pulled me inside and he said, are you Eric Maddox? I said, yes. He said, all briefings are canceled because we got him. We got him last night. I said, how'd it go down? He said, well, when you left, we called Bam Bam. And Bam Bam and the Delta Force team jumped on a helicopter, flew down to Baghdad, picked up Muhammad Ibrahim, escorted him back to our house, and planned and executed the raid of the farmhouse of Qais Namek Jassim. And Bam Bam and the team could not find Saddam. They looked for an hour, and finally Bam Bam goes to the truck, pulls the bodyguard out, cuts off his handcuffs, lifts off his hood, and said, where is he? And the bodyguard, the one guy Saddam trusted to never, ever give up his location, grabbed Bam Bam by the hand, took Bam Bam, the rest of the team's following close behind, takes him to the back side of the house, turns around, stares at Bam Bam, and starts doing this. And he noticed that he's trying to kick up something with his feet. He's digging up something with his heels. And they pushed him aside and they start digging, and they found a rope. And they continued to dig, and they realized this rope was connected to a lid. And they looked at Muhammad Ibrahim, and his eyes are big, and Bam Bam's thinking, is he underneath this thing? And they cleared it out, and Bam Bam reached down, and he lifted it up, and there he was. Saddam. He was pinpointed by the one guy that he trusted to never, ever, ever give up his location. And that guy broke in 2 hours for no other reason than he was listened to at a higher level than he had ever been listened to in his entire life. I still was not allowed to go home. I was sent to Washington, D.C., to then the office of former Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld. I briefed Secretary Rumsfeld, and then they took me to Langley, that's the CIA headquarters, and I briefed George Tenet, the former head of the CIA, and the entire Iraqi intel team. They then take me back to Secretary Rumsfeld's office. At this point, I'm with a bunch of admirals and generals, and as we walk in, Secretary Rumsfeld looks at one of the admirals that was representing me from the Defense Intelligence Agency and said, send Staff Sergeant Maddox back. Send him back to Iraq. And the admiral looked at Secretary Rumsfeld and said, Mr. Secretary, Staff Sergeant Maddox is actually a Chinese Mandarin linguist. He works in Los Angeles. And Secretary Rumsfeld looked at the director of the DIA and he said, do you have your own interrogators? He said, no, sir. We borrow from the Army and the Marine Corps. And he said, I want my own team. They're going to fall under you. And he said, Staff Sergeant Maddox will be the first interrogator. So by the time I did get back to my office in Los Angeles, California, I had an email from the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Apparently over that weekend, Secretary Rumsfeld had allowed the Defense Intelligence Agency to get the funding for a 30-person civilian interrogation team that fell under the DIA, and I was being offered the first position. I don't know if I had a choice whether or not I took that job, but I took it. Over the next 10 years, I did a total of 2,700 interrogations. I deployed 8 times and I conducted interrogations of prisoners from 25 different countries. But my very first assignment, as they sent me around the United States, into Europe, even Hawaii and in Germany, and they said, teach this technique. Teach this interrogation technique. And I didn't know what the technique was. I'd literally never seen anyone else actually do an interrogation before. So I went around, I said, well, you kind of got to work with them. And I let a bunch of the prisoners go. Without exception, they listened, and the commander would go, good, Staff Sergeant Maddox, we are proud of you. We're never going to do that. But my next assignment is I was back with the Joint Special Operations Command, but this time I was the head of one of these teams. I had a 6-person interrogation team, and I told them, I said, I've got to watch you do interrogations. I said, I've never seen anybody else do interrogations before. We've got to do it my way. And they interrogated. I watched them when we were deployed. They did these interrogations the way I was trained when I first got to Iraq, and I'm telling you, the prisoners do not break. I'm going to give you a statistic. Since 9/11 until now, the thousands of interrogations that have been conducted by the United States Army and the United States Marine Corps, 4% of prisoners break using the old techniques. 4%. I don't even know what those there was 0% for me. And as I watched them, the prisoners did not break. And I told them, I said, wait, I'm going to interrogate your prisoners. And I interrogated the same prisoners, and they broke. And the team of interrogators, they said, Eric, all you're doing is being nice to them. I said, I'm not being nice to them. I'm listening to them. They said, Eric, we hear everything your prisoners are saying. I said, whoa. You're hearing, but you're not listening to them. And I said, listen, we're going to do these interrogations side by side. And we did. We did side-by-side interrogation that finally dawned on me. I said, they literally are hearing a completely different conversation than what I'm hearing. And I told him, I said, we have got to figure out how you're not hearing the same thing I'm hearing. And as a team, we went through hundreds and hundreds of prisoners downrange in a battlefield, and we started to realize this listening problem was severe. It was real. I'm gonna give you another statistic. Across the world, people, on average, we only listen to 25% of what we hear. 25%. Why is it? And we realized it's because we have all these mental distractions going on in our mind. And as a team, we said, whoa, we have to figure out what these distractions are, and we decided we're going to start putting them into categories. And we created these categories of these listening distractions that lowers our listening to 25%. And we realized that they come in 6 categories. Category 1 through 6, category 1 being the least distracting, category 6 being the most distracting, the one that lowers your listening the most. Category 1 distraction would be something to the effect of if you've had multiple drinks and you're waiting for dinner and your shoes don't fit very well and and it's getting stuffy in here and the sound's not very good. They don't have anything to do with the actual person that you're listening to. It's just stuff going on in your immediate world. Category 2 distractions would be things such as if you looked at your cell phone right now and you saw that your child had been suspended from school, right? That would stop you from caring so much about the person you're listening to, because something in your world, and not to do with the person you're talking to, is more important. Category 3 is a distraction. It's very peculiar, but it's if somebody uses a term, like an acronym that you're not familiar with. Like if I would have stood up here and said JSOC and MOS, my AIT, it used to be 11 Bravo, but then I went 97 Echo, blah, 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 right? Those terms that we're not familiar with, they derail us, right? When we're listening to somebody, especially if we really want to hear and we think it's important conversation, if you hear a single term that you're not familiar with, your mind wraps around that axle trying to figure out what that term is. Literally will drop your wherever you are listening by 50%. But the biggest distractions that we all face are categories 4, 5, and 6. Category 4 distraction are biases that you have towards the person that you're talking to. Imagine how many times during the day you're having a conversation with somebody and you have a preconceived notion, positive or negative. And that preconceived note, that biases that you have towards them, it literally filters the words and communication that you're having with that individual. And when you misunderstand what somebody says to you, it drops your listening. And category 5, it's probably the one that affects us in this room, the EO type members, business leaders, business owners. It's the one that probably affects you the most. Category 5 is thinking about your goals, your objectives, and your agenda in that conversation. How many times are you talking to somebody on a daily basis at work and you're thinking, I need to get this message across, I need to enforce this, or I need to figure out, wait, what's the the challenges that this individual has, and I can service them and make them a client of mine, right? And you're like, that's what we do, right? That's what we're service-based industry. We're problem solvers. The problem is, as you're listening to this person, you're looking at what you can get out of it, and you're missing the details of the conversation. And then category 6. Think about when you're talking to someone. When you're in a one-on-one conversation, what's your biggest distraction? Anyone?
What you gonna say next?
Say it again, sir.
What you gonna say next?
That's the number one biggest distraction we all have during conversations, is just simply thinking about what you're going to say next in the conversation. How many times are we talking to someone and we have a great point? We have so many smart things to say, and we start thinking of those. If you think of one thing that you're going to say, it's going to drastically lower your listening. But if you start thinking of multiple, 2 and 3 things, you're not actually listening to anything that they're talking about. And so what we realize as a team, if we can identify these distractions and we can work to put those behind us as we're talking to someone, we can increase our listening. As interrogators, we can increase our listening from 25% to 50%. 50%, that's awesome, right? Like, that's amazing. That's twice the industry standard. No. That's only if you remove the distractions from your mind, can only get you to 50%. But what I want you to understand is, as a team of interrogators, over the next 10 years, we did thousands of interrogations. And while the other interrogators were breaking prisoners at 4%, we were breaking prisoners at 65%. 65%. And it come down to one single simple thing. We listened to these prisoners deep into the 80s and to the 90 percentile. And it comes down to this. And I promise, if you will embrace this, if you will listen to me of what I tell you now, and you will search yourself and figure out what kind of listener you are, this will change your lives forever. It will change the way that people listen to you. It'll change the way people look at you, and it'll change the way people respond to you. And we do one single thing. When we're in conversations, we seek to understand. We seek empathy of that person in the conversation. What does that mean? That doesn't mean sympathy. I'm not saying be nice. We're interrogators. You think I'm going to run around the entire military and say, be nice to all these prisoners? I would never say that. I say, seek to understand them. How many times when you're in a conversation, when you're listening to someone, do we seek to understand what is their perspective with regards to this conversation at this moment in time? If you do that, your listening escalates into the 80s and to the 90s. And when you do this, you cross what we define as the hurdle of trust. There's a hurdle of trust. If you will listen to somebody above 75%, it answers the one question that all people in a conversation are asking themselves. I promise, when we get done and you have a conversation, instinctively, subconsciously, every person that you talk to and yourself, when you're listening to someone, you're asking yourself one question. At this moment in time, in this conversation, does this person care more about me, or do they do themselves? When you listen above 75%, this amazing, magical thing happens. Whoever you're talking to looks at you and goes, you're different than the rest of the world. I'm drawn towards you. All people want more than anything in the world is to be heard, to be understood, and to be listened to. And if you will listen at this level by putting the distractions behind you, putting to understand what this person's going through, this perspective with regards to this conversation, in their mind, they're looking at you going, you care more about me than you do yourself. And I will tell you, it's not trickery. I've done 2,700 interrogations in my life, and 22,000, whatever 65% is, The ones that cooperated and broke with me, if they walked through the door right now, they'd look at me and they'd go, you saved my life. You changed my life. I owe you the world because you sought to understand what I need. And I will tell you, the biggest problem that we have with this listening technique is we have no idea how bad we are at it. So, I have a question. I want you to ask yourselves, are you a good listener? Let me ask you this. Who thinks they're a good listener? A couple of good listeners right here. 3. Good listener? Who thinks they're bad listener? Right, most hands should go up because I said the 25% thing. Who says they're a bad listener? Who would volunteer to say, I'm a bad listener, Eric? Sir, what makes you a bad listener?
Distractions.
What are those distractions?
Think about other things other than probably what I should be, the person in front of me. I'm solving all these other problems, but I'm here.
You're here, but you're solving all these other problems. You got these distractions. Let me ask you something. Have you had a recent conversation that you've most recently had that you think is a really important conversation that you can remember some of the dialogue?
Earlier, my daughter passed an important test. She's on the phone. So this is my wife. So they were on the phone.
Good listener, bad listener? Whoa. Why bad? Danielle, is that what it? Danielle, why is Ben a bad listener?
He's very distracted by the 100 things going on.
Right?
I'd also have to say, though, he's that number 5 about wondering what he can get out of this conversation.
Yes?
I think he's a strong number 5.
Strong number 5. Ben, let me tell you, how did the dialogue go with your daughter? Your daughter passed the big test, is that what you said?
Yeah, so she does ice skating. They called. They were saying they're coming home. She's like, hey, I passed the big test. Or I passed. I was like, oh, that's awesome. So I tried to congratulate her and so forth. But, it's like, and then it was on to the next thing. Hey, the kid's ready or whatever. So it's sort of like it was there and it went.
So, I'm trying to figure out, if you could have been a good listener, what would you have said? I mean, Dad, I passed the big ice skating test. What was your exact response?
I'm happy for you.
And what did she say?
I forget.
Yes, sir.
Eric, but he thought it, right? In this moment now.
Yes?
It's really a timing issue, is it not?
Say that again. Make your point again, sir.
So he has thought the thoughts that he wanted to think in that moment.
Yes?
Oh, how wonderful. Oh, goading over her. Oh, being present, being mindful. So don't we have a timing issue, not a listening issue?
Why do you say it's a timing issue and not a listening issue, sir?
He clearly heard her. He clearly knows what he should have responded to, have been concerned and empathetic toward her needs, just not at the right time.
If there is an awareness and it's a timing issue, that's a great question. Sir, what's your name?
Chris.
If Chris says it's a timing issue, how do we prove it's a timing issue? Because what it sounds like is that Ben would make these corrections in this listening, but chooses not to? Or it takes him a day or minutes to actually realize it?
Sort of like you're in business mode or out of business mode, more or less.
We're in business mode or out of business mode, and it comes down to really what people are going to start to figure out is go, wait, it comes down to a priority, what we care about. And so what I'm going to say is if Ben truly believed that being impactful and making an influence and gaining, because here's the amazing thing. I'm not throwing you, listen, we're all bad listeners. The number one thing we have to do, we got to admit there's a problem, right? We're not going to let AA steal that one on us. You got to admit there's a problem, right? Once we admit there's a problem, then we can grow. But the thing is, if we know we're bad listeners and we deliberately think about it, then why don't we act upon it? Why don't we act upon it? Because we do not realize that it's the priority. The number one thing you will achieve by being an empathy-based listener is you're going to gain trust. You're going to gain trust. We want to lead, and what happens, I'm a parent, so I fail at this as much as anybody. If I stood up here and told you how to listen to your children, that would be the most hypocritical thing I do. But what we try to do is we try to lead our children by saying, do this, don't forget, and blah, 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 right? Now, with clients, this is the biggest mistake we make as leaders. Listen, when we're talking, think about if you're in a business and you're trying to win a prospect, you're trying to win a client. We typically sit, we meet with them, and we're going to tell them all the great things that we do. We're going to say, look at my reputation. I'm going to wear nice clothes. Look, if we have some referrals, we're going to go through those referrals. And we're basically saying, look at all the stuff that we do well. And imagine it like this. Imagine that type of person is a speedboat going down a body of water. And you're so good and successful, you're creating this wake of success. And when we have those conversations to win a client or a prospect, we're saying, listen, I'm going to hook you on. And you're going to get the sprinkles, you're going to get the crumbs of success in my wake. And basically the person's listening to you going, they don't really care about me. They don't care about me at all. But they're so good at their job, I guess I'll get anchored on to their success. And that's what we even do as parents, is we say, I know what I'm doing, child that I love, do exactly what I tell you to do. Please follow my guidance, my direction. And we say, anchor on. And we wonder, I do too. I struggle with this as well. But we wonder why our kids don't love that. And it's because they have to be put in the boat. They don't want to be anchored on. They want to be listened to. And every time somebody talks to you, they're going to leave you breadcrumbs. And it's why real quickly, somebody else had a show. I want to hear somebody else wanted to raise their hand, but I want to hear, because I want to show you what a breadcrumb looks like, because it will open your eyes to what this process is. Who's willing to share with me another recent conversation, just quick dialogue with somebody they've recently had? Anybody had an important call today or a conversation today, and they could give me the quick dialogue of how that conversation went? Anybody volunteer? Here we go. Ma'am,
Yes.
Can you tell me your name?
Dana.
Dana, tell me the conversation.
So, CEO of a company that is one of his clients called me and said, hey, we have a problem. We're about to lose this deal. We need this set of messaging and positioning to put in front of this client. Let me tell you all the things that happened and what perception we're trying to create for the prospect so that we can close the deal.
Okay.
So I listened to what we were trying to create in that document, and I said, okay, got it. And then I went to my team and created a document.
Okay, that's a great example, but here's what I want. I want the actual dialogue.
Okay.
How'd the conversation go? What exactly did they say to you? They said, Dana?
Without being too damaging. So I didn't really say much. Okay, but he was telling me, okay, a couple years ago, the previous CEO of this company had been in the room with guys in the hospital and had been professional, and so he had a perception of their company based on that discussion. And so now that individual gets to this new prospect. We're late in the cycle of a deal, and he's new at this new hospital. He heard that they were about to do this deal with this company and said, I remember the CEO, that company sucks, and I don't want to do the deal. And so we had to create the perception. So that was
When they gave you that rundown, what was your immediate response? What was the first thing you said back to him? That's all right. Listen, that's a long one. I just need to, listen, I can do this. I want to show you. I need to show you really quick right here. I just want to hear a recent conversation, dialogue.
It doesn't involve my husband, I promise. So yesterday I had a very difficult conversation with one of my clients, which happened to be parents, and she said directly to me that what I'm providing is busy work and I'm repeating work for her child. I have a learning center, and that was very difficult to hear.
Right? So here we go. Good one. Can we play that? Can you give me exactly what she said?
Exactly that, because I've been playing that in my head all day.
So you got it.
Yeah, I got it. And so now it's like, okay, well, how can I?
No. Literally, I want to hear it. What exactly did they say?
Oh, well, exactly that. Well, she was very anxious. She's driving. She was saying,
Jace, I'm very upset because you're giving my child.
well, I mean, to her credit, like she wasn't trying. She was just saying how busy she was. So over and over, I heard the word. I counted actually. And it was like 20. And then she said how she feels for one child, it is her. So she's not seeing the results that she hoped. And then for the younger child, who is not seeing very little, like 5, that is that's like a repeat.
Okay, I'm just because I want to. It's exactly. So if somebody says that, right, we hear that statement. This is busy work, and it's not seeing the progress that we had hoped. What was your response?
My first instinct was, my apologies. I mean, I take it to heart. And so
No, I literally want to hear exactly what you said. Like, what did you say?
Well, no. No, I didn't. But I mean, I mean, I just said, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry that we actually did not meet sooner to discuss this, to figure out exactly what you were finding the weaknesses of the program, that I couldn't better support your children, so that you could see the results that you
Got it, right? Do we hear that? I'm so sorry, didn't meet the expectations. There's nothing wrong with that, right? What do? We say, well, the client's always right. You're very upset. That's standard. That's a typical comment, right? But what I want you to hear is what you basically did is you went to solution, which was, I'm wrong, you're right. When you go immediately to solution, you're not demonstrating that you really want to know more. And I would say go to discovery 1, 2, or 3 times there. So the discovery would be, what was the work that you felt was such busy work for your child? Tell me, where were your expectations that we have not met? They're going to tell you what to say. They simply want to know, do you care enough to inquire about it, right? Now, you're going to solution. You're being kind. You're not doing anything wrong. But they're still not getting what all they want out of that conversation, right? And over here, Dana, in your situation, I don't know exactly how it was going because we were kind of doing an overview. But I mean, literally, dialogue. The dialogue of the words, everybody's going to leave you breadcrumbs. And they're wanting to know, do you care? Are you listening? Are you diving in? And what I'm telling you is what we typically do is we understand an emotion, and then we go to a solution. Now, some people, glad it wasn't you, would go to an excuse. Or we've had most of our students really succeed, or we found that so many of our children, we have proven evidence that this works really well. You did not do that. But the apology before the discovery doesn't bring them closer to you.
Right. Well, I just want to mention that it's actually because everything she was saying was that she was doing it wrong. So I figured the best thing to do was just to apologize and take responsibility instead of sounding defensive.
Well, we certainly don't ever want to be defensive, but yes, sir.
Is there an opportunity for the discovery, though, to come across as you're trying to drill into what the problem was? So, like in that case, where she's asking, well, why is this busy work? You know, it could feel to them like you're coming across like you're really trying to drill in that it's really not a problem that you're trying to.
Well, we don't want to come across as though, why are you saying this is just busy work? We really do want to say, first of all, I appreciate you calling. This is how we get better, is when I hear from parents who have, suggestions on how we can get better. Can you help me understand? What are we doing that gives you that repetitive feel for your children, right? Those are the sort of things that we want to do. And what I'm saying is, when you have a conversation with somebody, I want you, and I would love if I could get, if I can get the dialogue for any human, any person, I can tell you, this is where you're going. This is where your listening is, right? And it doesn't mean that what we're doing is wrong. What I'm saying is there's a way to maximize trust in a conversation, and it comes down to picking up on the breadcrumbs, on these little bitty pieces. Every single statement that somebody makes, there's a high grade for the response that you can make. And I would say 90% of the time, we do not hit that high grade unless we care so much about the conversation that it truly is the most important thing in our world at that time. I have just a couple of minutes. What I want to do is I want to open it up to any questions that anyone has at this time. Yes, ma'am. Susan.
I have a question with raising children. So if you find somebody's done something wrong and you want to know which child did it, how in the world? How do you engage in a conversation that's not just, none of us did it? Like, I get that all the time. None of us did it.
So, right, do we hear that? And we're asking right in front of your son.
Earmuffs.
No, it's very, very simple. What you want to do if you're going to figure out which one of your children's not being completely accurate, separate the kids. And go, no. Let me show you what a waterboard looks like. No, you just separate and then come up with just a quick baseline 4 or 5 questions that you can measure the accuracy of real quick. They're gonna crack really fast. No, I promise. I'm not joking, I'm not messing with you. We definitely would wait a second, wouldn't we rather have just that our kids trust enough that they could tell us the truth? But if that's not the current situation, separate them. But what you don't want to do is spend so much time on the first child and then go, you want to just do quick snapshots, kind of 7 minutes. Do I use bright lights on that? Now, Susan, you said, do we use empathy-based listening on that? Well, what we're doing now, okay, because what we want to do with listening, we want to build trust. If we're separating our children and doing 2 and 3 minute grind interrogations, not a whole bunch of trust is coming out of that. That is purely an investigation type questioning. Maybe we can work on trust on a different time, but that is not a trust building exercise. The trust building exercise would be something different. But Susan's question was, how do I get the answer to this question? Yes, next question. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so when you guys were developing the 6 different distractions or whatever you guys were calling, you developed and categorized them. What did you do to train the other interrogators so that, especially for level 5 and level 6, to number one, recognize when they were doing that? I mean, they have to be self-aware. And then what did they do to practice to be able to not do that and be able to be more empathetic and listen?
The number one way to practice, I'm going to tell you right now, the number one way to practice, I need you to remember dialogue. So when I say, tell me about a conversation, nothing, but it wouldn't be, well, this occurred, this was the situation. Like, no, I need the dialogue. Because if I can show you 3 lines of dialogue and pinpoint, what if you'd have said this? What if you'd have said that? You're going to go, oh, shoot, yeah, that's... And so the training, you can double somebody's listening in an hour. In 1 hour. That's why I'm like, y'all want to see something? Who's got a dialogue for me? And I'm going to do it. I'm going to ask one. Does anybody have a quick 3 back and forth? Yes, sir, right here. I just want the dialogue. Tell me the situation, sir.
My 14-year-old came to me with a situation, and I started talking to him. He immediately looked at me and said, Dad, you're always trying to solve problems. I just want somebody to listen to.
But I need to know the dialogue. What was the dialogue they said?
What he said to me?
To started the conversation.
I can't remember the problem.
Anybody think of dialogue? Listen, because I want to show you. Because otherwise, this is just a cool notion. It's a cool notion, and you're never going to see it. I want to show you. I don't care what it is. I'm going to show you. Sir, Craig.
So the situation was my person that does the pricing of my furniture came and said, hey, we got these new glass whiteboards in. I want to price them at $300 a piece. I said, no, you need to do them at $400.
Let's stop. Perfect. Perfect. Say it. Here's how we get better. Say it again. Craig.
She said she wanted to price them at $300. I said, no, price them at $400.
Stop. That's all I needed. Thank you for giving me
Remembering
this.
my conversation with the person that nobody else could remember with their children.
This basically says to your salesperson, I don't care what you think. I have the answer, follow me. I've run this beautiful ship, this boat, anchor on, you're gonna succeed behind me. That person, so do we want to build that relationship? If you want to build the relationship and you want that person to trust you, then I suggest we say, why do you suggest that number? It's that simple. And let me ask you, we know that's a better response, but the answer, the thinking is, I'm just trying to get stuff done here, Eric. I don't tell me, and I'm like, listen, that's the clock that indicates when I'm out of your time.
You're not gonna give me the magical what?
Yes, no. The magical is, wait, what did I say? The key to increasing your listening is to seek to understand. Now they said, I would like to price it at this. Seeking to understand simply means, why are you looking at that price? That's seeking to understand. That's all that person wants to hear. That's all. And if you would do that, Craig, versus saying, nope, do this. When you say, nope, do this, they're like, all right, Craig doesn't care about me, but he's super successful. I work for him. He's my boss. Let's just drive on. But if you go, why are you thinking that? Well, boss, right? It's this liberating feeling, and they like us more. They want to be around somebody that's listening to them. So literally, find the dialogue. Find the dialogue, and you give the dialogue, and you say, how do you train this? Train right on the spot, dialogue on the spot. Because the response should be, why? Everything we say should be seeking to understand that person's perspective with regards to this topic at that time. Because the only goal of a conversation should be build trust in a relationship. Yes, sir, right here.
I was just going to say, I'm sure people have heard of it. There's a whole thing called Sandler sales technique. And basically it all boils down to, if somebody asks you a question, you say, that's a great question, why do you ask it?
I don't hate, that's a general.
I'm boiling it down. Somebody makes a comment, you say, that's a great comment, what makes you say that? You get behind, you go further, you try to find out what's the motivation behind it. Get the breadcrumbs. Get the breadcrumbs.
What I would suggest, and you are boiling it down, just make sure you actually find the breadcrumb. Because that way, that's almost just like having a sweeper, like a vacuum of bread. Like, I'm sure there's breadcrumbs here, right? But that's just a vacuum that says, great question, why do you ask? But why is it a great question? You can't say great question, why do you ask? Unless you can say, here's why it's a great question, right? If you can say, here's why it is a great question, why do you ask? Then that is a good follow-up on a breadcrumb. Does that make sense? Because otherwise, they're going to feel if it's just everything's.
Well, eventually it's, boy, I'm asking a lot of great questions.
Right? Anyone else? Yes, sir.
I hear that you point out verbatim reciting the dialogue is important. Your dialogue happened in a different language mostly. So how did you work with the translation issues between Farsi, Urdu, or whatever it is? Assuming
Most of my interrogations were in Arabic, Iraqi Arabic, and I had to use a translator the entire time. So what I chose to do was to use very basic words of emotion to make sure, because, you know, really what I had to do is demonstrate the understanding. But it's not as complex as you think. Once you're dealing on an emotional level, the words the exact details of the words are not as important as you think once you can dive into the correct emotion. And I really don't know how else to explain it other than that. And I'll get to, yes, right here. And then,
To follow on there, did you find body language was incredibly important for that empathy as well? Were you in front of this?
so I don't think body language, I think it's very dangerous to read body language for deception, right? We can do neurolinguistics when eye angles go up and down, and if you are interested in that, let me know. I can kind of give you a 30-second tutorial on how that works. What I would say most importantly is don't study. People want to give tips of a list of what it looks like to be an active listener. You know, they say open posture, lean in, nod. I'm like, da-da-da-da-da. If you're thinking about what it looks like to be an active listener, you're not listening. People always say, Eric, you're a great listener. I can tell by your body language. I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. You just be an active listener and the fruit will come out. The fruit of active listening will get shown. Just do it. Don't worry about what it looks like. Right, yes, right here.
Okay. So I was wondering, going back to the capture.
Yes.
What was the first thing that Saddam said when y'all lifted? Do you know?
So I was not there. First thing he said to the team, what they told me he said was, I'm the president of Iraq. I'd like to talk to your president. So, yes, sir.
Does culture affect the interrogation or listening process? Are you reading someone in Chinese versus Arab versus a European, South American?
How does culture, right? What's the effect of culture? So culture has its all different effect, but I want to make a point. I didn't worry about the culture of the country of the prisoner, because when you're in a war, you have a war culture. I mean, imagine, we got a Charlotte culture. If we got invaded by Martians, because no one else can invade us, but if we did, let's say literally, and they took over, your culture, the way you know life, is immediately going to change. Then there's a prison culture, so you can behave one way and act one way. But if you're a prisoner, that means a prison. And then there's an interrogation booth culture. So I've completely ripped this person out of normalcy. So for me to kind of worry and to think like, how is culture? These impacts of these changes in my prisoners' lives are so strong that it almost doesn't matter. You know where it really comes into play? It's whether we're winning or losing a war. The culture of a prisoner who feels like they're winning the war, that'd be Taliban, Northeast Afghanistan prisoners. I mean, we're getting run, it was a tough gig up there. They have a completely different mindset, a culture, than for prisoners who feel like we're dominating them in that war. Yes, ma'am.
How do you deal with, you're dealing with psychopaths. So with the empathy.
Can I stop? No. I want to make a statement, because I just want to stop you just so you have a better empathy of what's going on. They're not psycho.
Not all, but you don't think Saddam was tortured and...
Saddam was jacked in the head. Yes.
Dealing with prisoners like that, how do you use the empathy to kind of gain their trust?
Most of my prisoners, even the crazy ones, they are human. There is no Darth Vader and there's no Luke Skywalker. There's as many people I don't trust, especially in Afghanistan, that are supposed to be our friends. Some Afghan soldiers that we've trained. That's where we lose most of our soldiers, is getting killed by our friendlies over there. But I found that almost all my prisoners, they're just normal people. They're just in a jacked up situation. They've been a little bit brainwashed, but they do want to be heard. They want to feel like they're listened to, and they want to feel like their life makes a difference. That's what I really found. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any tips for dealing with people that you interact with frequently that are just clearly not good listeners?
Right? Did you hear that? How do you deal with people who are bad listeners? Listen, here's the thing. No, no. She's asking for a friend. Here's the deal. Why do you want to be a good listener? I'm gonna get this real quick. I'm gonna finish up. Why do we want to be a good listener? Anybody say it?
Makes you a more effective human being.
More effective, sir. What do you mean by effective?
You do your work better.
Do your work better.
More productive.
You are more productive. And I'm going to say this. What I like about the word effective, it makes you more influential. It gives you power. The better listener has more power and influence. The better listener has more control and influence and is a better leader. So the bad listener, guess what? They won't have the power. You worry about you being a great listener, that gives you strength and power. And it can be even in a service mindset. Empathy listening is service. Be a service leader. They still have all the power. You look at Dale Carnegie, how to win friends and influence people, right? Win friends means people like you. That's good. We want people like, and influence. We want to gain influence. So how do you deal with a bad listener? Just say, I'm going to get all the power from them. Because when a bad listener has a friend or an associate that's a good listener, they just want to follow you around and be around you because you're listening to them. All right. Yes, right here.
Quick question. So you said you had 2,500 interrogators.
27.
27. At some point,
Right, it's rounded. It's rounded.
so like that, I'm sure at some point you got distracted. Something happened in life outside. So how did you get back during that process to active listening? What are some of the things that you do to get back if you do find yourself distracted?
Great question. We all get distracted. I get distracted. It comes down to the realization of this. I have to gain power over my prisoners. I want to gain influence over everybody in my life. Therefore, if I'm going to be distracted, I lose control. Does control matter? It does to me. It's the same as if I do this, I make money. If I eat food, I get nutrition. If I listen with empathy, I gain control and power and influence. And that sounds like, man, those are some manipulative type characteristics. No. Yes. I'm going to do and listen to you. I'm going to listen to you to seek to understand you, and I'm going to solve all of your problems first. Is that okay? Yeah, of course. That's awesome. Great. And in return, what? Well, in return, I just want to be with you. In return, I follow you. In return, I'm loyal, dedicated, blind, loyal to you. That's what you get. Right? So for me, removing distractions, now we can go 1 through 6. Here's 1 through 6, how you remove the distractions. Right? I'll give you category 3. If category 3, if somebody uses a term you are not familiar with, you stop them immediately and go, JSOC, I'm sorry, what is JSOC? Just get it off your brain because you're going to wrap around that axle. Solution. There you go. Somebody uses a term you're not familiar with. Stop unless you're supposed to know it and you didn't do your homework and you're going to look like an idiot. Then don't. But there's a solution to all 6. But how the overarching theme of how you remove distractions is because I want to maximize my influence. Anyone else? All right. Yes, sir. No, it's got to be a good one.
So one of the things that you mentioned was, empathy listening. It sounds like it takes time, right? So what do you do in a time crunch situation where you're trying to be an empathetic listener, but you got a real hard stop, like a meeting, for example?
So if you have a hard stop, understand if you're trying to gain influence, which we should be with the person you're talking to, you're still going to maximize the amount of influence you can gain by listening to them with empathy. If you have to make that decision, I don't have time, then just accept I'm choosing that this conversation is not about building trust through empathy. I'm here to give direction. I'm here to enforce a statement to I'm here to convey information for this reason. I'm here to gather information. I mean, think, what are the purposes of conversation? To give information, to gather information, basic entertainment, or to influence. Maximum influence is going to come if you're an empathy-based listener. If you don't have time to do that, then you have to make it. Then I would say there needs to be the rare exception where you say, I'm not trying to build trust. I will not build trust. I've got to tell this person. Craig says, no, price it here. Right? That's fine. That's a decision. We make that. But as long as we're aware that there is a way to build trust by picking up the breadcrumb through the dialogue.
I told her later her hair looked really nice.
There you go. All right. Hold on.
We have to stop.
No, I got it. Thank you. We're going to stop. We're going to eat dinner. Sorry I ran out of your time. And I want to thank you guys. I will be joining you for dinner, and we'll continue the questions. Thank you all very much.